My name is Sarah. I am 45 years old, and my heart completely stopped when the heavy oak door of the executive office clicked shut behind me. I was standing face to face with my new boss, David, a 28 years old man who had just taken over the company from his father. He was staring at me with a faded folder in his hands, the exact same folder I had buried deep in the archives 2 decades ago. A cold shiver ran down my spine as he looked me dead in the eyes. He asked me the one question I had prayed I would never have to answer, holding the evidence of his father's betrayal. I promised I would take this dark secret to my grave, but looking at his desperate eyes, I realized my nightmare was just beginning. To understand the absolute terror that gripped my chest, I have to take you back 20 years. I was 25 years old, drowning in endless hospital bills. My mother had fallen severely ill, and every single penny I made went straight to the pharmacy. My husband, Mark, a 27-year-old mechanic, worked night and day, coming home with his hands cracked and stained with black grease. We were barely surviving, eating instant noodles and turning off the heater in winter just to save a few dollars. The stress was eating away at our marriage. That was when my boss, Richard, a 48-year-old man who owned the entire manufacturing firm, noticed my desperation. Richard was a towering, ruthless figure who commanded a room just by breathing. He called me into his office late one Friday evening, long after everyone had gone home. The factory floor was silent, and the only sound was the ticking of the large grandfather clock in his suite. Richard poured himself a glass of expensive liquid and pointed to a stack of blueprints on his massive desk. He knew I was one missed paycheck away from losing the tiny apartment my husband and I rented. He looked at me with a cold, calculating gaze and offered me a lifeline that felt more like a noose. His business partner, Arthur, a brilliant engineer, had just finalized a revolutionary design that would double the company's profits. But Richard did not want to share the glory or the money. He wanted to claim the patent solely for himself and push his partner out entirely. To do that, he needed someone to alter the digital timestamps and forge the witness signatures on a set of fake preliminary sketches. He slid a thick envelope across the desk. It was filled with enough cash to pay off every single medical bill my mother had. The catch was simple. I had to do the forgery, and I had to swear on my life to keep his secret forever. The internal battle that raged inside me was agonizing. I remember splashing freezing water in my face in the bathroom. I was raised to be honest, but honesty was not paying for my mother's oxygen tanks. Honesty was not fixing my husband's broken back. I walked back into that office, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the pen, and I signed my soul away. For the next 3 hours, I sat at that computer, systematically erasing Arthur's name from history. I backdated files and stamped Richard's name on everything. When I was done, Richard smiled and handed me the envelope. I took the money, but I felt completely hollow inside. I went home that night and cried in the shower until my eyes were swollen shut. When my husband asked me where the sudden windfall came from, I lied to him too. I told him I got a massive corporate bonus. The relief on his face was beautiful, but it felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross, trading my integrity for my mother's survival. The consequences of my actions were swift and devastating. Within a month, Richard executed his hostile takeover. He presented the forged documents to the board, proving he was the sole creator of the design. Arthur was blindsided, humiliated, and legally barred from his own creation. I had to sit in the corner of the boardroom, taking minutes, while Arthur screamed that his life's work was being stolen. He looked right at me at one point, begging for anyone to tell the truth. I simply looked down at my notepad, my heart hammering against my ribs. Arthur lost everything. He went bankrupt trying to fight Richard in court. 2 years later, the sheer weight of the financial ruin broke him. He passed away from a sudden heart attack, leaving behind a shattered family. Richard became a multimillionaire, and I was promoted to his executive assistant, a silent watchdog carrying the weight of a dead man's ruined life on my shoulders.
Years turned into decades. The guilt never truly left me. It just became a constant, heavy hum in the background of my life. I watched Richard's son grow up. David was just a little boy when the hostile takeover happened. Unlike his father, David was kind, empathetic, and genuinely cared about people. I watched him transform into a brilliant young man, completely unaware that his entire life of privilege was built on a foundation of lies and stolen dreams. Richard eventually grew old and tired. His health declined, and he decided to step down as CEO, passing the crown to his son. On his last day, Richard pulled me aside. His voice was raspy, but his eyes were just as sharp as they were 20 years ago. He reminded me of the promise. He told me that his legacy was now my responsibility to protect, and that his son must never know the monster his father truly was. I nodded, feeling the invisible chains tightening around my neck once again. Working for the son was entirely different from working for the father. David wanted transparency. He wanted to modernize everything, to open the books, to audit the past, so he could build a better future. Every time he ordered an audit of an old department, a fresh wave of panic would wash over me. I tried to subtly steer him away from the early archives, claiming those files were legally sealed, but David was relentless. He was looking for the original schematics of our flagship product because he wanted to create a retrospective documentary for the company's upcoming anniversary. He wanted to honor his father's genius. The irony made me want to vomit. I started losing sleep. I would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in cold sweat. My husband noticed. We were older now, our lives comfortable, but he could see the shadows under my eyes returning. One evening, on our porch, I finally broke down and confessed everything to him. My husband sat there in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. I expected him to scream, to call me a monster, to pack his bags and leave. Instead, he reached out and took my trembling hands in his. He told me that we were young and desperate, and while he did not excuse what I did, he understood the impossible choice I was forced to make to save my mother.
But then his expression hardened. He looked at me with a fierce intensity and said that the past was dead, but the future was not. He told me that keeping the secret now was no longer about survival. It was about protecting a rich man's fragile ego at the expense of my own soul. He urged me to gather whatever evidence I still had and prepare for the inevitable. And he was right, because deep down, I always knew I had kept an insurance policy. I never destroyed the original preliminary sketches with Arthur's real signature. I had hidden them in a safety deposit box. That brings us to the moment in the office, the moment my heart stopped. David was holding a secondary accounting ledger he had dug up from the basement. He placed it gently on my desk. He pointed out a glaring discrepancy, a massive unexplained cash withdrawal made by his father exactly 1 week before the patent was filed, the exact amount of money that was used to pay off my mother's medical bills. David looked at me, his eyes searching mine. He asked me what that money was for. He said he had found emails from Arthur claiming he was set up. David's voice cracked as he asked me to tell him the truth. He said he needed to know if his entire life was built on a lie. I looked at this young man, a man I cared for like a nephew, and I saw the desperate need for truth in his eyes. I thought about the promise, and then I thought about Arthur's ruined life. I took a deep, shaky breath, and the dam finally broke. I told him everything. I did not spare myself, and I did not spare his father. I described the rainy night his father handed me the envelope of cash. I described how I systematically forged the documents. I described the look of absolute despair on Arthur's face in the boardroom. David collapsed into one of the leather armchairs, his face turning pale as a ghost. He buried his face in his hands, and a loud, painful sob ripped through his chest. I walked over to my bag, pulled out the key to my safety deposit box, and placed it on the desk in front of him. I told him that the original, unaltered sketches proving Arthur was the true inventor were waiting for him at the downtown bank. I stood there, fully expecting him to call security, to have me arrested, to destroy my life just as I had destroyed Arthur's. I told him I was ready to face whatever punishment he deemed fit, that I would go to the police and confess. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. It felt as though the entire room was mourning the destruction of the legacy his father had built on a mountain of lies and deceit.
But David did not call the police. He took the key, retrieved the documents, and immediately contacted Arthur's widow and children. He arranged a massive private settlement, transferring a significant percentage of the company's shares to them, ensuring they would never worry about money again. Then he went to his father's mansion. David stripped his father of his honorary chairman title and banned him from ever stepping foot in the building again. The untouchable Richard was left to rot in his lonely mansion, his reputation secretly but completely dismantled within the family circle, completely isolated from the empire he stole. As for me, I packed up my desk, ready to face the consequences. But David stopped me. He told me my courage to finally tell the truth gave him the chance to make things right. He asked me to stay and help rebuild the company's culture. I still work there today, but the weight I carried for 20 years is gone. I see the plaque David installed, dedicating the patent to Arthur. I learned that a promise built on deceit is a prison. Now, I ask you, looking at the choices I had, the mother I had to save, and the secret I had to keep, would you do the same in my place? Until the next story.